1 sec. I just want to clean them. Yeah. I wish that everyone was here. It's on. Wait, we have to turn this on for him, right?
But maybe Al, when we leave the stage,
Good evening. Before we begin, can everyone just take a moment to silence your cell phones? Thank you. I am Allie Rosenberg, along with my co-chair Stacy Science, the co-presidents of the Enough Club, Eva Millerman and Jared Science, the Enough Club advisor, Helen Harrison, the Seven Bridges Enough Junior Club advisor, Lori Lichtenstein, and the Bell Enough Junior Club advisors, Mariano Piccirillo and Gretchen Trippett. We welcome you and thank you for joining us for tonight's 7th Annual International Holocaust Remembrance Day program. We would like to acknowledge the presence of our elected officials who have joined us this evening and continue to support our important work. Westchester County Legislator and Chairman Vedat Gashi, Town Supervisor Victoria Tipp, Town Council members Jen Klein and Ali Chemtab, and Chappaqua Central School District Board of Ed member Kaylee Wong. Congressman Mike Lawler, who couldn't be with us this evening, has issued a very special proclamation that we would like to read now. Whereas Alfred Schoenfeld, born in 1936 in Košice, Czechoslovakia, survived the horrors of the Holocaust through extraordinary resilience, courage, and perseverance alongside his family, and whereas despite persecution, displacement, and life-threatening circumstances during World War II, he and his family endured, ultimately finding liberation in 1945 and building a new life in the United States beginning in 1948, and whereas since 2014, Alfred Schoenfeld has dedicated himself to educating and inspiring generations of middle and high school students throughout the greater New York area by sharing his powerful story of survival, hope, and moral courage. Now, therefore, I, Congressman Mike Lawler of New York's 17th Congressional District, do hereby proudly recognize Alfred Schoenfeld for his resilience, his survival of the Holocaust, and his dedication to educating students by sharing his powerful story of survival and hope.
Tonight we are here to commemorate International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is recognized on January 27th, the day that Auschwitz-Birkenau was liberated. Auschwitz-Birkenau was the largest death camp of the over 44,000 camps established by the Nazis. Of the 6 million Jews and 5 million others who were murdered during the Holocaust, over 1 million Jews were murdered at Auschwitz-Birkenau. Survival for Jews during this time was almost impossible. Some were able to miraculously survive by hiding, and one of those individuals is tonight's keynote speaker.
We are lucky to have Holocaust survivor Alfred Fred Schoenfeld with us this evening. When he shares his story tonight, please listen and remember what he says so that you can remind future generations that the Holocaust happened to men, women, and children with personalities and stories, not to abstract numbers.
As the great-grandson of an Auschwitz survivor, I remember all the personal stories my great-grandfather used to share with me. Through my great-grandfather, I learned the Holocaust is not just a story about hate, it is also about resilience, humanity, and kindness. As we listen to Fred's story this evening, we will be reminded that even in darkness, hope can prevail.
I am Phoebe Rosenberg. Along with Hannah Fishman, Eve Wolfberg, and Talia Goldner, we are members of the Enough Club. As Anne Frank said, where there is hope, there is light. It fills us with fresh courage and makes us strong again.
At the beginning of January, approximately 50 students from the Enough and the Enough Junior Clubs went on a field trip to see Anne Frank, the exhibition in New York City.
The day was so powerful as we walked through a full-scale recreation of the complete annex furnished as it would have been when Anne and her family were in hiding.
We now invite Enough Junior Club students Maya Eisen, Lily Kate Gurdian, Grace Gralitzer, Ella Wilner, and Thomas Peterson, who will share their personal reflections from that day with us.
Hi, I'm Lily Kate Gurdian, member of Enough Junior at Seven Bridges Middle School. While visiting the Anne Frank Museum, I learned many things. What I found most fascinating was the room she hid in. I never knew that there were 7 people along with Anne staying in the room. It was very tiny, and I can imagine that the conditions were not ideal. I was most shocked at how all of the windows were blocked off. I could never imagine being deprived of sunlight for 3 whole years. Overall, I enjoyed the experience very much, but feel disgusted by the actions taken towards the Jews. It is hard to believe that people could be so cruel.
My name is Maya Eisen, and I am a part of Enough Junior. What I learned from going to the Anne Frank Museum was that Hitler didn't have any of the death camps in Germany because he didn't want Germany to be associated with killing. This makes me angry because Hitler did terrible things to Jewish people and didn't take any of the blame.
My name is Grace, and I'm a member of Enough Junior at Seven Bridges. While visiting the Anne Frank Museum, I was fascinated by many things. One of the things that was really interesting was that there was a video playing, showing the live footage of Nazi occupation and progression over the years. I was shocked to see the live footage of what they were doing to the Jews, which was extremely horrible. I could never imagine my home being invaded and being scared to walk around in my hometown every day. Overall, the museum showed me the harsh reality of life for the Jews during the Nazi invasion.
Hi, I'm Ella Wilner, a member of Enough Junior. While visiting the Anne Frank Museum, I unfortunately learned that Anne's dad was the only survivor. Anne's diary was kept by Miep Geis, a person who helped to hide them. She held on to her diary in hopes of returning it to her. She found Otto Frank, Anne's dad, and returned the diary to him. It was cool to learn how Anne's dad made her diary famous, but I can only imagine how horrible the things she wrote inside of it were. During the exhibition, they gave each person a story, her diary. I hope to read her diary soon.
Hi, I'm Thomas Peterson, a member of Enough Junior. I thought it was really interesting and sad to see the real artifacts and replicas. The audio helped me understand what Anne and her family went through. Walking on the map showed how many concentration camps there were, and that was shocking to me. It made me feel sad knowing Anne and her sister died from disease and might have survived if the war had ended sooner. Seeing the real objects from the annex made everything feel more real and meaningful.
I am Ariel Goldner, along with Izzy Schlanger, Piper Van Scoik, and Rebecca Fishman. It is our honor to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, Holocaust survivor Alfred Fred Schoenfeld. Fred was born in 1936 to Simcha and Ilonka Schoenfeld in Košice, Czechoslovakia.
The family initially avoided the deportation of Jews that began in 1942 because of Simcha's employment with a chemical and dye company that was deemed essential to the Slovak economy. He survived numerous close calls, moving first to a rural farming area and ultimately finding refuge in the Tatra Mountains.
They were liberated by Czech partisans and Soviet forces in February 1945. After the war, Fred resumed his schooling and his father resumed his work for his previous employer. Fred's sister was born in 1946 and the family immigrated to the United States in 1948.
Fred has shared his incredible story of survival with numerous middle school and high school students throughout New York State and recently appeared in Scarlett
Scarlett Johansson's movie Eleanor the Great. Please give a warm welcome to tonight's keynote speaker, Holocaust survivor Fred Schoenfeld.
Good evening. Thank you very much for your invitation. It's my great honor to be here, especially tonight when we think of the Holocaust. Before I start my story, I'd like to tell you a few things. For many, many years, I never considered myself a Holocaust survivor. In my mind, I thought a Holocaust survivor is somebody who went to concentration camps and survived. When I speak to students, the first thing they want to see my tattoo number, which a Holocaust survivor would get in a concentration camp. I can't give it to them. So for many years, I didn't consider myself a survivor, till my kids kept bugging me and telling me that I was there before the Holocaust. I'm here today, therefore I'm a Holocaust survivor. And when, in a few years recently, all the Holocaust deniers would come up and write books and had films about the Holocaust survivor being not a reality, I decided to come out and talk and tell my story. I also want to mention that when we speak about the Holocaust, people usually think about the 6 million Jews who perished. There were many, many other people perished in the Holocaust who weren't Jewish. For instance, the gay community, the gypsies, the physically disabled, and I guarantee you, had there been any people of color in Central Europe at that time, they would have been on those trains to concentration camps also. I also want to mention that there were many, many, not enough, but many Gentiles who helped to save the Jews at the risk to their lives. In my story, there is one man about whom I will tell you later, who also came and saved my life. And that's something that I will always be grateful. So, my story. First of all, a short history lesson. You see the map over there, that's the map of Europe as of 1939. This is Czechoslovakia, right here, the small country. All these countries were formed right after the World War I was over. The famous conference in Versailles, they cut up all the European Austrian Empire, and they created these countries. What they didn't do properly was, and this is what happened. This was Czechoslovakia in 1919. It was a pure democracy. As a matter of fact, the Constitution was written in the United States. It was a complete copy of the United States Constitution, meaning freedom of speech, freedom of religion, everybody was equal. However, in 1933, Hitler came into power, as you well know, and he started to make all kinds of demands. In 1938, he invaded Austria, and in 1939, there was a famous Munich conference in September of 1938, and when they made up this country, up there on the western border were about 4 million German-speaking people. It was called Sudetenland. Those of you who know history, this will be familiar. Over here were a lot of Hungarians, which made, and besides that, the Czechs and the Slovaks, even though they were cousins, hated each other. So I was born in this town, Košice, in Czechoslovakia. But in 1939, the Slovaks and the Czechs split up, and Slovakia became a ally of Germany, Hitler's Germany. And since my father was in business, his business was centered in Slovakia, we moved right here to this town called Prešov. And then at the famous Munich conference, Hitler invaded Austria, and then he wanted to, he says, liberate the German-speaking people on this side of the country. At the Munich conference, Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, they gave this to Hitler, and they thought that if Hitler would get this peace, everything, there would be no war. Does that sound familiar today? It's almost like Vladimir Putin wants Ukraine, and it's the same thing. So anyway, they gave him that part of the country to Germany, and over here, the Hungarians took over. So again, I want to emphasize that Slovakia became a fascist country, and there were no Germans around. It became so right after that, in 1941, the Slovakian government came out with the anti-Jewish codes, which meant Jews were stripped of their rights, stripped of their assets, and trouble was starting, all kinds of regulations. So as a kid, I was 6 years old. What do I remember about that? I can remember that on Sunday mornings, my father used to take me to the movies. All of a sudden, a big sign, no Jews allowed. We couldn't go to the swimming pool, no Jews allowed. The only place that we could play was in the big courtyard in our synagogue. However, to get to the synagogue wasn't so easy, because if you walked out on the street, you were usually met by a bunch of kids twice your age who would beat you up. So I still remember to this day, my friend had two huge German shepherds, and he would take the shepherds, the dogs on a leash, and he would escort us to the synagogue courtyard to play. I remember being in the first grade, walking into school, and being met by my teacher at the front door, and directing me not to my regular seat, but directing me and 3 or 4 other Jewish kids to the back of the room. Kids that I used to play with yesterday, today were no longer my friends, and they would spit at us. So this is what I remember as a kid. However, my parents, I can just imagine how my parents and all the adults had to feel. Well, they did not know. They didn't know what was happening. There were all kinds of rumors, and there was life. Every Jewish family had to register. Everybody over the age of 9 had to wear a big yellow star. So when you walk on the street, you were a target. You had to give them your assets. They wanted to know everything that you owned, and that was the situation. I have here for instance, a document which was dated May 29th, 1943, which states that my father no longer could own the business. He could work, but he no longer owned it. It was owned by the government. Other thing that I remember, which I'll never forget, we never knew, even everybody in Slovakia could have a radio except the Jews. Jews weren't allowed to have a radio. Even the Slovaks had a radio, but they could only listen to the state radio. It was a seal on the radio. And I remember in my basement, somebody came up with a radio, and they were able to maneuver the seal, and that's the way, so they would listen to BBC, the British Broadcasting System, to find out what was going on in the world. I can just imagine my parents and other adults not knowing what was going to happen. There were rumors all over the place, but nobody really knew what was happening. So the closest call in 1942, the closest call that my family had, they decided to round up all the unmarried women, girls over the age of 16. And on March 20th, and they were going to ship them supposedly to a labor camp in Germany, but they were going to Auschwitz. The date was March 25th, 1942. The reason I know the exact date, because there was a movie made on about this called 999 The Forgotten Girls, and there's also a book about it on which you can get on Amazon. So what do I remember? Why was it so horrible for me? So I lived in a small town, and the railroad tracks were right across the town, and we saw the freight cars lined up, and they were rounding up all these women and girls. And so obvious, and somehow they still had empty spaces, and they weren't going to leave empty unless they're full. So they started rounding up people. And I remember my father running into our apartment, telling my mother and me to get into bed, and I was supposed to pretend that I am sick, and she's taking care of me. And sure enough, two tall guys, I still remember, dressed in their black boots and the black raincoats, came in, and they told my mother to come with them. My father started pleading that she can't, that she's taking care of me, I'm sick. And by miracle, they turned around and walked out. And that was a pretty close call that we had. I forgot to show you. Now, this is a picture of my grandfather. That cute kid, that's me. My grandfather lived in a town about 20 miles from where we lived. And in 1942, we wanted to go to spend Passover with my grandfather. And of course, my father had to get special permission to get on the train. And one of the restrictions that they had is that, especially on Jewish holidays, there was a curfew. Jews couldn't go out on the street. Anything just to ruin our holiday. So I remember we came into town, and we waited till it got dark. And my mother got dressed in peasant clothes so that she could look like a local person. And we snuck into my grandfather's house for the Seder. And this was April 1942. 6 weeks later, he was put on a train and went to Auschwitz. And here, by the way, this is my, see that cute kid? That's me in 1939. And this is me also. So then, I'm sure you know the architect of the Holocaust, Adolf Eichmann, came to Slovakia, and he made a deal with the government that the Slovak government would pay in today's money $2,500 for every Jew that they deport, with one condition, that the Germans make sure that they never come back. So the town that I lived in had a population of 25,000. There were about 7,000 Jews. Only about 700 survived. So Slovakia was a sort of an agricultural country, and most of the doctors, lawyers, dentists, businessmen were Jewish. So the Slovaks did not want to still had some use for them. They didn't want them to be deported right away. So these people got exemptions. My father, being a prominent businessman, got one of those exemptions. What did it mean? It meant that you're safe, but you don't have to worry. You're exempt from deportations. But you know that it wasn't really a guarantee, because once again, when they were loading the trains, if there was still room, you could be walking on the street with the exemption, and they would grab you right off the street and put you right on the trains. So my father and my mother and I, my father had a huge warehouse, and when the trains came in, we went into hiding. Every day, one of his trusted employees would come and bring us some food and some water. To this day, I cannot imagine how my mother and my father were able to keep me. I was 6 years old, how they could keep me quiet, because during the day, people were working in the warehouse, and any peep out of me, any noise could have meant the end. We were up at night. We couldn't put on the light. It was all dark. There were no iPhones or TVs or anything like that. That's where we were. So we stayed there for about 7 weeks, till the transports were gone. It was safe for us to come out. I still remember coming out after 7 weeks of not talking, just whispering. It took us about a month till we got our voices back. Stuff like that I remember as it was yesterday. So by that time, 6 months later, the same thing happened. 6 months later, the same thing happened again. And again, we had to go back into hiding in the attic, and we stayed there also about 7 or 8 weeks. By the time after that time, they were basically finished. Most of the Jews from the area were already gone. When we came out, there was not too many Jews left, and the government issued an edict that everybody had to move further away towards the west of the country, and they were tightening up. So that's where we went. So we went to a farmhouse where we rented some rooms, and that we stayed there. So now that we're in the year 1944. 1944, the war was coming to an end. From the eastern end, the Russian and the Slovak army was coming. Czech army was coming. From the west, it was General Patton and the Americans coming from the other side. So with that happening, so the Slovak resistance movement came to life, and they started a resistance in the middle of the country, not too far from us, to try to get at the Germans who had come in and try to get the end of the war. Along with them, hundreds of Russian partisans were parachuted to help with the uprising, and they were doing damage to the Germans till October of 1944, when the Germans decided that they had enough, and they were going to crush the uprising, which they did. So then we realized that it was no longer safe to stay where we were, and we headed for the Tatra Mountains. It's a range of mountains on the Polish border, high up, and to the mountains. So when the Slovaks of the resistance went back to their homes, but the Russians had no place to go, so they also went to the mountains. So we joined with them, and when I say we were a group of about 30 people. I was the second youngest one. And all throughout those mountains, every mile or two was the same thing. Another bunch of Jews hiding out, partisans. The partisans would roam from one place to another. They would go and blow up the tracks and try to do damage to the Germans. By that time, we could also already hear the airplanes flying over us and the cannons going off, and we could look straight down to the valley in the white snow and see see the front, see the craters created by the bullets. And one day, early, it was February, late at night, all of us, and even though the Germans knew that they were losing the war, they still had enough time. Every day, they would go up into the mountains looking for the Jews. In many instances, they were successful, and they got them. Fortunately, my group never came near us, even though they could have been a mile away. So one late in the afternoon, all of a sudden, we see a bunch of soldiers coming up the mountain. We thought for sure had to be the Germans. Everybody got hysterical. However, it wasn't the Germans. It was the Russian army together with the Czech Free Army coming up the mountains. And what I remember the most about that day, there I was, standing in front of me, was a tall, huge, beautiful soldier with a machine gun, and he spoke Yiddish. He was Jewish. You can imagine how he felt. So many, in the Czech army, there were many, many Jewish soldiers who had, prior to the war, who had escaped to the west, and then they joined the Free Czech army. So what they told us was that they were going to try to get at the Germans. The Germans were dug in below us, and they were going to attack them from the rear, and to get them out of there. And they said to stand, just to stay still, and they would be back. And it would take them about 2 or 3 days, and that they would come back and get us. I still remember them leaving. One soldier gave me a huge loaf of bread, which I right away hid because I thought it would last me for the next week. But it didn't happen that way, because early next morning we woke up to tremendous artillery fire, guns blazing all over the place. The soldiers were back, and they came back and they told us that the Germans were dug in very, very deep. It might take weeks before there would be any movement, and they told us that they would take us back to safety. So I remember it was early in the morning, big snow. They lined us up in one line. As I said, we were about 30 of us. I was the second youngest. They told us we had to have a space between us, and they told us that whenever we would hear a whistling sound, we had to hit the ground, because those were the bullets flying over our heads. Because what we had to do, we had to cross the frontier, the line. And so we started out early in the morning. I still remember it was going very, very slow. And I remember every once in a while we would run into a dead body. And I still remember on some of them the bright red blood on the white snow. And slowly we made our way. And by the time night came, we crossed the line, and we were free, actually free, February 1945. We stayed with the army that night, and the next morning, we got a ride with the army to go back to our town. So what happened when we came back to our town? We couldn't go back to our house. There were other people living in our house with our furniture. Nothing to do. They were there. However, before we had left a year ago, before my father went into the backyard, and he buried my mother's candlesticks, our menorah, and this silver Kiddush cup, which has become a relic in my family. Obviously, we use it on Shabbat, on Friday nights, on holidays. A year ago, it traveled to California for my grandson's bar mitzvah, and 6 months ago, it went to Virginia for my grandson's wedding. So So there we were. We were back in our hometown. Scattering of Jews made their way back. I remember every afternoon going to the town square, and where the army trucks would be coming in, bringing back Holocaust survivors, some of them still in their striped uniforms. I remember some happy reunions, and unfortunately, many people who were very, very disappointed. So the war was almost all over. People were coming in. As I said before, in this town, out of the 7,000 Jews, about 700 survived. But they were broken families. Either the kids were gone or the parents were gone. In many instances, there were many teenagers who lost their parents, and by that time, help was coming. And that time there was no Israel yet, but they sent in people from Palestine to help with these young people who they were getting them ready to come to Palestine, to Israel. So everybody was trying to get their life together. I remember, I know that every Jewish woman was pregnant, including my mother. My sister was born in 1946, and everybody was trying to get their life together. My father had two brothers and a sister living in the States, and they got in touch with us, and they said they were sending papers for us to come to the States. My father refused. He said, "Why should I go?" 6 weeks after the war, he was back in business. Czechoslovakia was again united. It was going to be a democracy. Everybody thought everything was going to be okay. But luckily, they insisted, and he did file the papers. So, as I said, everybody tried to get their lives together. Young people were getting ready to hopefully go to Israel. And life was sort of normal. There was no problems. The former neighbors all of a sudden became friendly again, whatever. However, in 1948, the communists started to gain power, and they were coming back into the government, and everybody started to realize that this would not be a great place to stay. So, and in May of 1945, the State of Israel was formed, and the majority of the Jews had a free entry to Israel. All my friends were going to Israel, and we were going to the United States. I still remember being sort of ashamed to tell my friends that I was going the easy way, going to Israel, while they were going to, I was going to the United States and have, the rich United States, and they were going to this poor country where most likely they would have to live in tents for the first year that they got there. But anyway, in June of 1948, my family, we left for the United States. 4 months later, the Iron Curtain fell, and we were lucky again that we got away. So we came back. We came to the United States in 1948. My father had, as I said, had two brothers and a sister living in Pittsburgh. So we went to Pittsburgh. Unfortunately, right after we arrived to the United States, my father got ill and he passed away. So there was my mother left with I was 14, my sister was 4. My mother couldn't even speak English, but she had a sister in New York. And they brought us to New York in 1950. And that's where we came. I went to high school, I went to college, I got married, raised a family, but that's not the end of the story. My kids, usually Holocaust survivors, especially the older Holocaust survivors, very lots of difficulty telling their stories. It was too painful for them. But my family always was open, and everybody in our family knew everything that happened. And my kids, who were very interested, started bugging me. They wanted to go spend their summer vacation in Slovakia. Well, my first reaction was never. I never wanted to go back there. And they kept bugging me, and then I thought of one good reason to go back. Remember, I told you about the one man who used to bring us food and water to the warehouse. This was, by the way, this was 1998, exactly 50 years after I left. Now, I knew that he no longer was alive. However, he had a family. He had kids and grandchildren, I was sure. And I wanted to go back to find him and tell them that what the grandfather did for me and my family. I also wanted to, those of you who've been to Israel or know about the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, up on the hill, when you climb up to the hill towards the museum, it's surrounded by hundreds of trees. Every tree has a plaque, and it's dedicated to the righteous Gentile who saved Jews. I wanted to do the same thing for this man. So I called City Hall, and I said, I asked for some information about this man. The first question that they asked me, they wanted to know if I was related to him. I said no. Well, therefore, we can only give information to relatives. The reason for that being is many survivors used to come back and try to get their property back, and this way they cut you off before you had a chance. So I never got the wish to honor this person who saved my life. However, in my date book, which I carry with me every day of my life, I have his name written here, Ivan Sigan, and I keep him close to my heart because this is the man who saved my life. Without him, there was a very good chance that I would not be standing here. So we made our way to Slovakia. My kids wanted to spend a week, 10 days. I figured it out. I told them, I'll give you 4 days to take you around. That's all I gave you, 4 days. So there we were. We rented a car. In those days, there were no iPhones. My kids had these video cameras. They're walking around. Everybody knew that the Americans were here. I could spend an hour telling you about my trip to Slovakia. I'm only going to mention 3 things. The first day, we made a stop in the house where I lived. Kids were taking movies. A guy comes out, and he says, "What are you doing here?" I said, I looked him straight in the eye. It wasn't this. I told him I lived in this house 50 years ago. Obviously, it was somebody else, but he figured it out who I was. When I told him that I lived there 50 years ago, he gave me a dirty look, and he said, "Well, tell them to take their pictures." He used a few adjectives which I wouldn't repeat here, and he said, "Get the hell out of here." That was my first welcome. The second thing that I want to tell you about, we went to my grandfather's town. This is the town, and this is the synagogue. At that time, there was only one Jew left in this town, and all he did there, he was taking care of the synagogue and the cemetery. This is the inside of the synagogue. On the left-hand side, there's a plaque, and I found my grandfather's name on it. I guess he must have been a big shot in the synagogue. On my wife's side, my kids' great-grandfather family also came from the same town. And this man remembered their name, and he climbed up to the attic, and he came back down with a huge volume of the Talmud with their great-grandfather's name on it, and he gave him to them. So this was and the day we were there, they were whitewashing swastikas of the synagogue. So, and the last thing that I want to tell you, on my mother's side, my mother was born in a very, very small village near the Polish border. I've never been there, but I've heard so many things about it, so many stories about their beautiful house and their beautiful village, so that I decided to go there. And my aunt was still alive in Israel. I told her that I was going. She gave me directions how to find this beautiful stone house. So she said, you drive into town, go to the railroad station, cross the wooden bridge, and then make a right turn, and you'll see the house. So that's what we did. Drove into town, saw the railroad station. I'm looking for the wooden bridge. There's no more wooden bridge now. It's a beautiful steel bridge. It's 50 years later. We cross the bridge. We see the street. And my kids are taking pictures all over the place. And a lady asked me, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm looking for my grandparents used to live here many, many years ago." She said, "Are you looking for the Jewish houses?" I said, "Yes." So she says, "I think this is the street where the Jews lived, but let me call somebody." So she called. Every time during my trip when I wanted to find out something, I couldn't go to young people. I had to go look for old people so could they remember. So this old lady with a cane comes walking up, and I tell her what I'm looking for. And she said, well, she points to the house. This is where the Jews used to pray. And it made sense to me because this was such a small village. There was no synagogue in this village. And I remember my mother telling me that my grandfather used to conduct services there on the high holidays. So we saw that. And while this was happening, 3 guys come running across the street like shot out of the cannon, and they started yelling, "Are the Jews back? Are the Jews coming back to get their houses?" So these are the 3 illustrations that I want to show you that nothing has changed. History is repeating itself, and it's repeating itself every day, and that's why I talk to people, I talk to schools. They should know the past and make sure that doesn't happen again. So in closing, I just wanted to read 2 things. One is a short poem written by a Lutheran minister. He was originally a Hitler sympathizer, then he was thrown into jail, and he wrote this. "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." And the other thing that I want to share with you is a famous quote by Elie Wiesel. I'm sure everybody knows about Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust historian, Nobel Prize winner. And he wrote, his quote is, "When you listen to a witness, you become a witness. By being here today, you are not just an audience. You are becoming part of this legacy. And as witnesses, you hold a special responsibility to share this experience with others, ensuring that the truth of the Holocaust continues to reach future generations." I thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you. Thank you. I'll answer questions.
I am Jared Shiro, and along with Charlie Ash, we thank you, Mr. Schoenfeld, for sharing your story of survival with us. As Elie Wiesel said, people become the stories they hear and the stories they tell. We promise to share your story so that the world will never forget.
We will now have the opportunity to ask Fred questions. We would like to begin by asking, how did you find hope and stay strong?
Well, you have to understand that I was a young kid. I really I was thinking like a young kid. That would be a great question if you could ask my parents. They would be able to answer it.
Does anyone have any questions?
I can't hear. No.
You had said you were in the mountains and you were walking with the group that you were with and you crossed over to freedom. Where were you? Where did you end up?
Where did we end up? Well, in Slovakia, just a few miles where it was liberated already. You know, we just walked. You know, it was in Slovakia. Yeah, the liberated part on the Russian side of the war.
When you were in the mountains, were you praying?
Was I playing? Praying? I don't know. I don't think I was praying, but I do remember that the adults. Everybody was Orthodox. They prayed every morning, and one thing that I remember we had a big Hanukkah party. It was during the winter time, and I don't remember whether we had what kind of food we had, but whatever we had. I do remember celebrating Hanukkah up in the mountains, 1944.
I know you said you had no iPhones and social media. Do you remember when you were hiding in the warehouse for the 7 weeks, what you did during the day?
I really can't remember. What I do remember is that at night, when my mother was trying to get me to go to sleep, she used to tell me stories. And most of the stories that she used to tell me that time was about the farm that I just told you that I went to visit, about the chickens and the roosters and everything that they had over there. That I remember every night she would tell me stories, get me to sleep.
When you got to the United States, not speaking English, I presume, and what was the reception in the States like? Did you feel warmly received, or did you feel part of a limited community? I'm interested in what experience our country offered.
Well, I'll tell you about my trip to the United States. We came, as I said, I guess we must have been rich because we came under Queen Elizabeth. And I remember my father bought me a Slovak English dictionary. And what do you think the first words that I was looking for? You'll never guess, so I'll tell you. The first English word that I was looking for was ice cream, because I was able to tell the waiter. So yes, I came to Pittsburgh, and obviously I didn't speak English, and at the beginning, kids weren't too friendly. I was 12, but I started school in Pittsburgh at that time in 1948 and 49. There were immigrants were coming every day from all over the world, and there was a school that specialized for immigrants. So we were all together, and those were my first friends. And as soon as I learned to speak English, it was much easier.
Was it hard to adapt to the life in the United States, like learning the English, the people, everything?
Well, once I once I got to high school, and I came to New York in 1950. Went to high school, the High School of Commerce, and I remember I got the first day in school I got mugged. It took about 30. I had about 30 cents. I was a new kid, and I was mugged. But however, afterwards, I was a soccer player, and as soon as I got on the soccer team, I became one of the boys, and then nobody touched me, and everything was okay.
You mentioned some harrowing experiences upon your return back to Slovakia after the war. I see there are a bunch of young kids in the audience tonight as well. As they embark on their high school and collegiate experience, we saw post October 7th the encampments. What is your message to the young generation on how to combat the anti-Semitism and how to address it?
Well, first of all, before you do, for you to be able to fight anti-Semitism, you've got to study the history a little bit. You have to know what it is and how it came, and how evil it is. And then when you have all the facts, you have to be confident enough to say it as it is. Be proud who you are, and never give up, and stand your ground. And that's the only way that you'll be able to do good. Well, as I said, my father was just ready. You know, he was a pretty good businessman, and I have no doubt that he would have been very, very successful had he lived. And he was just getting ready, planning some sort of a business. And then he passed away, and we came to New York. So my aunt and uncle living in New York supported us while I was going to high school. I worked after high school, and then went to night school in college, so I started helping my mother. Also, my mother was a seamstress, so that's how we sort of managed.
This is the last question.
When you were like hiding, was like the only thing you like had to eat like bread or water?
Well, we had, okay, good question. So I don't remember what we had and what we didn't have, but I'll tell you two things that two foods that I remember. Once the partisans brought up a few sacks of beans. So for the next 2 weeks, imagine 30 people in one room eating beans and beans and beans. You got the message? That's number one. As a matter of fact, for almost 20 years after the war, I could not look at a bean until one day I was at a bar mitzvah, and they were you know what cholent is? They were serving cholent, and the smell was terrific, and I had it, and since then I'm eating beans. And the other thing that I want to tell you, one night the partisans brought a live cow up to the mountains. They slaughtered it, and my mother was the chief cook, and that was the only meat that we had for 7 months. So that's what we ate.
I'm Sammy Rose. Along with Ella Goldberg and Leo Levin, we are members of the Enough Club. Tonight's program helps the Enough and Enough Junior Clubs fulfill our mission to empower students to stand up to hate and create a community of acceptance through education and the understanding of people's differences. As we learned here tonight, And through the Holocaust lessons that we learn in school, the Holocaust didn't start with gas chambers. It started with words of hate.
As we watch anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred continue to rise even in our own country, we, the next generation, understand that it is our responsibility to educate, never forget, and find ways to speak out against hate. The mission of Enough and Enough Junior has never been more important than it is today.
We are excited to announce that the 7th Annual Writing and Arts Contest for Holocaust Remembrance for middle school and high school students will begin on Monday, February 23rd, and we encourage all students to participate. We thank you all for being here tonight and for supporting our work. It is now my honor to welcome Town Supervisor Victoria Tipp, who will conclude tonight's program.
Thank you so much. Fred Schoenfeld, thank you for taking the trip to come here to give us an important testimony that we gather here in this place at the Chappaqua Performing Arts Center every year to hear Holocaust survivors on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. So we are so appreciative of the time you've taken. Thank you. And I want to take a moment to truly thank the Holocaust and Human Rights Committee, co-chairs Stacy Science and Ali Rosenberg. Your work is so tremendous, and it's really worthy of a world-class organization. And it's hard to think that you're a town committee. So I want, and the entire Holocaust and Human Rights Committee are members who are so dedicated. And truly, your work is incredibly impressive, and I want everyone to take the time to recognize them. And likewise, members of the Enough Club, led by Jared Science and Eva Millerman, and all of the members of that club, Enough Junior, who are coming up and will take your place at the high school. You are tremendous, and what you presented today was very powerful as well, including your reflections on the visit to the Anne Frank House. So thank you for that. Fred, I just want to say just a few reflections about what you imparted to us. And it struck me that when you spoke about your fellow students' reactions who were friends before and suddenly became enemies. And it's acts of hate that in the grand scale may be small, but those small acts of hate, they don't feel small, but they're small, that provide a platform to allow for greater atrocities. So I think it's so important when we notice those small acts of hate to really speak up, because they build, and each of them is important to address. So thank you for that. And it just goes to show that we say never again, but these aren't just words. Never again is really a call to action. So we'll take what we learned here today and put it into action. And thank you for inspiring us so much to continue doing this work. And I want to thank the audience for being part of this. Thank you for coming here tonight. And get home safely. Have a good evening.